So today what we're going to do is we're going to be covering nested CRUD. And nested CRUD is something that we find inside of Restful Routing. There's a lot of like technical words I could say and all that, but nobody really understands. And let's just jump over to CarMax. So let's take a look at a website. Whenever you visit a general website these days, there's a way that they format their URLs. And most of the time, if they're a tech company that's trying to keep up with the most, up to date and have the best practices, they try to follow what's called Restful Routing patterns. Now, I posted this a little bit earlier. Let's see if I can still find it. This is a little thing that I wrote up a little while back. Restful routing is basically, there's an official definition for it, but the way that I've heard it used in the industry is that it's the type of routing where it's like you know exactly what you're talking about, like, and what you're going to be visiting from the URL. So an example of Restful Routing is like if I want to see all the dogs on a particular website, I'm going to go to the URL /dogs. If I'm going to a particular, if I want to see the form to create a new dog, I go to /dog/new. If I want to see a particular dog of a particular ID, /dog/that particular dog's ID. It's a way that they structure their URLs so that they match up with the rest of the webs, and it's like a standardization process of how we actually create our URLs to be standard. So if we go to CarMax, I noticed this yesterday. If I'm looking for a car, let's say I want to go shopping, you'll notice that CarMax, I go to /cars right away. So I know based off of that, there is a cars table inside the database. Not particularly, it's not particularly like mind-blowing, it's CarMax. But if I want to go to SUVs, what you'll notice if I go there, it goes to /cars/sport utilities. Now, sport utilities is not like an ID like what we're used to seeing, like this over here with the dog /ID. But this is a unique identifier that they use to basically say, like, whenever anybody makes a GET request as carmax.com/cars/sport utilities, they strip this particular word out of the URL and look that up inside of the database. If I go further and I want to look for I'm looking for an SUV, specifically what am I personally looking for? I am a boring person, so I'm going to get a Toyota. And what you'll see here is I am going to /cars/sport utilities/Toyota. Based off of this URL alone, I know when I query when I actually get it inside of my app, I know I'm looking for specifically sport utilities under the Toyota model. And if I keep going even further and I say that I'm looking for the model of a RAV4, you'll notice that they just keep appending more and more things onto the URL. There's more than, and what you'll notice here is that what we've been doing up to this point is we've only been creating CRUD apps with one resource, meaning that I can create, read, update, and destroy just cars. But I can create, read, update, and destroy other things too. Like I can create, read, and update, and destroy types of cars. And underneath that, I can create things like I can create, read, update, and destroy makes of cars and then models of cars. So there's this idea of nested resources where when I don't deal with just one particular table inside the database, I'm dealing with multiple tables inside of the database. And that's what we're going to be trying to tackle today. Real quick, I'm just going to start rapid firing on people.
John, so are you saying, like, I would think that it would just be one super duper cars database with lots of fields and all those nestings just guides the search. Are you saying that's not the case, that it's actually, they break it into?
Actually, that is not the case, yeah, that's a good point. Let me bring this back up. So just to repeat the question for the recording and just so to make sure that I understand. There is not, so see what I hear you saying is, you're saying that, oh, there's one giant super duper table called cars, and cars, it includes everything underneath it.
It would seem like in this case that would be perfectly workable.
Yeah, so there's probably a giant super duper database called table called cars underneath, but there are other related tables that we associate here because Toyota refers to cars. But Toyota, if I change this to, actually I can't change this to cars, but there are, right now, Toyota is nested underneath sport utilities. So you have SUVs, but Toyota also makes different types of cars. So let's say I'm looking for a body style of, oh no, what did I do? I'm going to shop, sorry, for a sedan. And what you'll notice is that it changes from sports utility to sedan. And then if I look again for my make of Toyota, at the very bottom, I'm just appending that onto there. So a car, my guess of what's happening is cars have many brands, have many makes, and makes have many types of cars. So it's not one master database. It is a bunch of databases. It's a bunch of tables. It's not one master table called cars. It's a bunch of smaller tables that are nested together through a bunch of joins.
But I mean, I would think it would be all the cars are literally in one, but then you have a table for all the brands, a table for all the body styles, a table for, you know, a dynamic table for all the descriptors, and then those become fields in the super cars table.
Yeah, so my guess is that there's a cars table, but it doesn't hold all that much information inside of it. So basically, what I'm saying is there is a model called a Toyota. This particular car / this particular ID number, there's this thing right over here, though it should be /cars and not /car because there's more than one. This particular car belongs to a make, a model, a body type, a year, a mileage. So it's like, yeah, they belong to many different tables, and then that one car table pulls from all of the other ones underneath. The
Right.
URL mimics the query, not the database. Most of the time you can guess, so to answer your question, which is the URL mimics the query, not the database, most of the time you can actually more or less figure out the database from the URL.
Right, okay.
I feel like that was an inadequate answer for your question. Let's hold on to that question, and then we'll try to tackle it afterwards, because I'm trying to like balance like the time and
Sure, absolutely.
Question. All right, so we're going to try to create something that's going to be called nested CRUD, because up to this point we've only done one thing so far. We've only created, read, updated, and destroyed one particular resource, and when I say resource, one particular database table. Now we're going to be writing to two. So with that, I'm going to open a new window and shift over here. All right, everything I'm about to type, by the way, is coming straight from your curriculum, so nothing is brand new, but I will go line by line and try to take things a little bit slower. I will tell you that if you're doing web development specifically, like I am, CRUD is everything. And we're going to keep drilling it in over and over again, because it's the thing that's going to follow you around for the remainder of your career. I have never not done CRUD stuff in the 6 years that I've been a web developer at this point. And I challenge you, I have only had one person taught me on this one. Find one particular web app or one website that you use, web app that you use, because a website can just display information. Think of one thing that you use that's not a CRUD app. Amazon, you can create, read, update, and destroy orders. Create, read, update, and destroy addresses. Create, read, update, and destroy your credit card information. Facebook, create, read, update, destroy posts. Create, read, update, destroy pictures. Create, read, update, destroy comments. Allrecipes.com, which is probably the whiteboarding question I can hopefully get to today. You can create, read, update users, recipes. Recipes, you can look up recipes based off of like ingredient, based off of cost. Like there's only one person that taught me on this one, and that's just because the organization stopped using update, which is Twitter. You can create tweets, you can read tweets, you can delete tweets, but you can't update tweets. But I was like, that's still a CRUD app. They just decided to not allow you to do update. So what I'm trying to say is everything comes down to being a CRUD app, and this just kind of follows you forever. So that's why we're spending a lot of time on it. That's why it's a lot of repetition. I'm gonna make this, actually this should be the appropriate size. And with this, what we're gonna do is we're gonna create an app today called Cohorts and Students. So we're gonna create cohorts and we're gonna create students. So in the past, we just were creating like books inside of a library. So that's like one particular resource, and now we're gonna do two. First things first, I'm going to change over to my desktop. And now you can see I've changed over from my desktop. And I'm going to create a nested CRUD example folder, and I'm going to cd into that. So I'm going to make a directory called nested CRUD example. I'm going to cd into nested and then tab to complete because I forget everyone's in week 7 already. All right, anyway, we're going to create a virtual environment. And who can I see that I haven't called on in a while? Dan Lindbergh, tell me a little bit about what a virtual environment is and why we use it.
Well, it's very similar to NPM and JavaScript, where it's basically setting up specific requirements to run your application. And so if you need any particular modules to be imported, it imports it without contaminating or conflicting with your existing operating system.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, great answer. I kind of think of it as like, do you remember Bubble Boy, the movie? Like, if you haven't watched it, it's a terrible movie, but it is kind of funny. So the idea there is like this immunocompromised person is has his parents create literally a plastic bubble around him, and basically anything can happen on the outside, but as long as nothing gets on the inside of his bubble, he'll be perfectly all right. And that's the same idea here when we're talking about a virtual environment, which I'm going to create using Python -m, which means, hey, Python, make a virtual environment called, by default, virtual environment. The second argument is basically what you're naming your virtual environment. Convention says that you should name it VENV. But you can name it poop, you can name it whatever you'd like to. I'm going to open up everything inside of VS Code inside this current window. And I'm inside of the nested CRUD example that I saw earlier, and there's that virtual environment that I created. So Dan said that this particular virtual environment is important because you can install a whole bunch of modules or libraries inside of this bubble, and it won't affect the outside world, and the outside world won't affect it, similar to Bubble Boy. So I created my virtual environment, and now I'm going to activate it by running source, then bin activate. And you'll notice that between this first line and the second line, I've got this parentheses VENV. This is how I know that my virtual environment is active. I can deactivate it by just typing deactivate. It goes away, up, and then now I'm back inside my virtual environment. At this point, I can feel free to install anything that I want. It's only installing within this virtual environment, which honestly is just a giant folder of stuff. That's all it is. The first thing I'm going to do is just do pip install Django. Even though my machine has Django on it, I want to make sure that my current version of Django is the most up-to-date. So I'm just going to reach out to pip, which is the online repository which holds all of the official libraries. I'm just going to go ahead and grab it and install it here. I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to run Django admin start project old cohorts. And I'm going to put this dot here. This dot is basically saying, hey, Django, start a project called old cohorts in the current folder that I'm in. Press enter, and you'll notice that old cohorts starts over here. Now remember, a Django project, in our case it's called old cohorts, has many apps within it. And what that means is like if you tried to think about like an Amazon, for example, Amazon, as a giant project, has many apps underneath it. It has instant video, it has books, it has a whole bunch of other stuff. They have Twitch now, evidently. So you can think of each one of those individual like items that Amazon sells is like a project. It is really good to have encapsulated. Yep, that's pretty much, Eric in the chat wrote, that's having your virtual environment is good so that you don't F up the rest of your computer, essentially, in other projects that you have. So I've got old cohorts, that's the application, that's the project name. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create an app called cohorts and students. So Python manage.py, start app, cohorts and students. So I've got my app called cohorts and students underneath my project of old cohorts. Now, all of this stuff that we're about to do is the basic setup for every single CRUD app. It's the same steps every single day. So I created an app, but it's not registered to the project. First thing you do, jump inside the app, go inside of settings, and at the very top, this settings file, which is automatically generated by Django, has a bunch of installed apps. These are things that come to you for free with Django in order for Django to even run. So this project has Django, contrib, admin, auth, content session. I don't know what all of these do, but these are the things that these are apps that automatically ship with Django that they must use in order for the app to run. What I'm going to do at the very top here is I'm going to add the one that I just created, cohorts and students. And what this does is whenever I fire up the old cohorts project, what's going to happen is they're going to say, oh, here's line 34. There's an app called cohorts and students within the same folder, within the same directory, and I'm going to load that one up as well. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to jump inside of cohorts and students. I'm going to open up the models file, and we're just going to follow this pattern of MVT. M standing for model, which is the thing inside of your application that talks to the database. This is the class from week 3. V is the view. It's also known as a controller, but confusingly inside of Django, it's called a view. This is where all the business logic takes place. And then finally, we have T, which is the templates, which should be views, but that's where all the HTML goes. Right, so we're going to create our cohort. We're going to create a student. So first things first, I'm going to keep everything in there. I'm going to create a class called cohort. It's going to inherit from Django's database class called models. And I'm going to bring it, this is a model, a Django model is what's happening. So I'm going to create all of my fields. So a cohort, like your cohort, has a name. It's called Lima Platoon. So I'm just going to say cohort name, models.char field, look familiar from week 6, and equals 220. So we've got a cohort with a name. It has, let's say, a start date and an end date. Start date and end date. And I'm just going to have both of these be a char field, even though I should be doing a date field. So models.char field, max length equals 220. If you're wondering how I did that, I clicked on one particular line. I held down the command key on Mac, clicked on another line. Now I have multiple cursors. And then I'm going to create something called defstir, and I'll explain what this is in a second. And I'm just going to copy this. All right, so this str is what's called a dunder method. A dunder method is something that's built into, like underneath the hood of Python for each particular class. In this particular case, this dunder str method is basically saying whenever you return the stringified version of an instance of this particular class, the way I want you to represent it looks like this. It's ID equals self.id, cohort equals self.cohort, so that when I look at it, I know exactly what's being returned to me. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to keep it like this for right now. And the other one that I'm going to create, which is a student, I'm not going to have that str, and we'll see the difference. So again, all I did was I copied directly from your curriculum. I created a class called cohort. Yes, it makes your admin objects look a lot prettier in better format. Yep, that's exactly what it is. All right, so I've got my cohort right over here. Got a cohort name, a start date, and an end date. So this is the name of the table. These are the column names underneath. And I have another table now. It's called students, but when we talk about it in class format, it's singular. It belongs to a cohort. So I have a model.foreign key. I'm connecting to the cohort model. So a student belongs to a cohort through this association right over here. This onDelete models.cascade means that when I delete a cohort, I'm also going to delete the associated students. The reason behind this is, imagine if I had Alpha Platoon and I had a whole bunch of students and then I deleted Alpha Platoon because I needed to delay it, or I decided to go in a different direction and not call it Alpha Platoon anymore. All the associated students, if I didn't have this onDelete models.cascade, would just belong to nothing. And we don't want that. We want to recreate them. And then finally, we've got this related name students. This one's a little weird. I think we did this in one of the Django challenges, but essentially what's happening here is when I do Alpha Platoon, or when I find a cohort inside the database and I want to find all the associated students, it would have to look something like cohort.student.objects.all versus if I just do cohort.students. That's what related name gives me. It gives me the ability to shorthand this so I can do cohort.students and I get all of the students at once. Each student, each one of you has a first name and a last name. And I think that's pretty much all we need for our initial model. Yeah, I think so. So we just have cohort, we have student, cohort name, model name. Okay, yeah, I think that looks good. Are there any questions here? I just want to pause because now we're dealing with two tables inside of a database. I see mouths moving, but I don't know if you're just chewing. Maybe I guess people are just chewing. All right. All right, so we've created our models. It's kind of like a formula. We just kind of keep doing these things. So we create we start our project, we create our app, we register our app, we create our models, and then we create our migrations. So just because we have this models file does not mean that we've actually put anything inside of the database. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to run Python manage.py, and we're going to create something called make migrations. Before I type this, you'll notice that whenever I started typing inside of models.py, this migrations folder showed up in VS Code. That's because whenever I make changes to this file, VS Code knows, oh, you're probably going to change something within the database. If I open up this folder, you'll notice that there's just an init file and no actual migration yet. But when I run this particular command, you'll notice that there's 0001 initial. A migration is nothing more than a list of instructions for the database to follow, for the computer and the application to follow. So whenever I created this migration right over here, all it did was automatically generate all of this. I don't really know what any of this does. All I know is that when I do this next command, Python manage.py migrate, I actually create an actual database. It runs through all of the commands here and actually creates the tables with the columns underneath. And what you'll also notice is in every single migration, there's a number to the left that prepends it. These run in order. So if I ever decided to change something, let's say I want to do cohort name and date, maybe is John's favorite equals models.bool field. I don't know. Let me Google that. I actually don't know. Django bool field. Pick this one up. Bool field. Okay, Boolean field. Okay, I'm gonna grab that. What you'll notice here is I just altered this particular models file. I just decided I wanted to add this one on, and if I create another make migrations over here, let's say we're trying to add a non-nullable field without a default. Let's say default equals false. You'll notice that once I changed something inside of models.py, Django automatically knew that I changed something. And when I ran make migrations again, it created a number 2. Now what's going to happen here is that whenever you fire up your particular application, it's going to run migration number 1, followed by migration number 2, followed by migration number 3. The importance of this comes from, like, let's think about Amazon. In 1990, early 1990s, Jeff Bezos was just selling books. So his database migration at that point might have just had like 1 or 2 tables. And over the years, they've added more and more things, right? They've added, Prime Video, they've added photos, they've added Twitch, then they're continuously adding more and more things. Now they become an online marketplace for selling other things. There are other migrations that are going to come along the way, and they need to run in a particular order, because if they don't run in that exact order, your entire thing falls apart. Yes, AWS is another example of what they're doing. So these are all numbered, and they run in order for that particular reason. So I don't want this anymore, because I don't know how it's going to blow up my stuff. So I'm going to make another migration where I remove, and you'll see that it's like I created my initial one. I added this particular field called is John's favorite inside the model cohort, and the field that I'm adding is that, and then I'm removing it here.
Hey,
At this point,
John,
go
sorry.
ahead.
In some of the exercises earlier, when we ran into problems, we deleted the earlier migrations. Does O3 depend on O1 and O2? Like if we delete those, will it crash, or is it standalone enough?
So my recommendation is, how do I answer this? Right now, it doesn't matter. So in your particular case, go ahead and delete it. It won't matter that much, because the last migration that you create has the least number of dependencies. If I deleted number 1, number 3 doesn't work. But if I delete number 3, number 1's still going to work. That's a really dangerous game that you play there, though, because you don't want to delete the migrations, because that keeps a record of everything that you've done to change the database. And whenever new developers come onto your team, when they say, like, I want to create my database and like migrate all of these migrations, if one of them is missing, it could blow up everything down the line for everybody else. So I would personally probably just delete all of it, kind of like what Julian said, just go ahead, delete all of your migrations, because it's a dangerous game that you play if you're deleting just one thing randomly.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so I've made all my migrations. Right now I've created 3 of them. And just to show you that this will work on its own, I'm going to run python manage.py migrate. And yeah, I think everything ran successfully. It doesn't have a blow up message. It says okay and okay. All right, let's try to get some stuff inside of the database. So I'm going to just open up this file right over here. And I've got all of this so that I can go over it with you. Change the formatting from plain text to Python. And let's clear out the screen. I'm going to run python manage.py shell. When I run python manage.py shell, it enters into a Python shell, so I can do regular basic Python commands, or I can like print hi, just regular things like this, but it's also connected to my application, which is really nice. And what this means is that I can interact with this as a regular Python shell, and it has access to my entire database. So I'm going to copy this one line at a time and just kind of see what we've got. This first line, from the cohorts and students folder, there is a models file, and I want to import 2 classes. I want to import the capital C cohort and the capital S student. Right now, if I wanted to, I can do cohort.objects.all, and I get that query set back. So this is actually connected to my database. I'm saying, like, essentially select star from cohorts. Remember, we did Django ORM queries. So I could do cohort.objects.all. There's nothing inside of there, which makes sense. I haven't actually created any cohorts yet. Same thing with objects.all. Empty query set, because there's nothing actually within the database quite yet. So I'm going to create 2 cohorts. I'm going to create one called Bravo, one called Charlie, and let's save this here. So I've got Bravo. Hopefully this works. I have cohort ID equals none, cohort name is Bravo, start date, and end date. Great. What you'll notice is that this ID doesn't exist yet because doesn't actually yet exist inside the database because I didn't save. So if I run cohort.objects.all, right now it's still an empty query set. But if I do bravo.save, I'll look at Bravo. First things first, I have an ID now, which means it's actually successfully saved inside the database. And if I look at all the cohort objects, there's my cohort right over there. I'm going to create the same thing with Charlie. And I'm going to create a whole bunch of students. I haven't thought about these people in a long time. Working at Raise as a senior software engineer, working at A-Flight as a senior crafter. He's selling big contracts for tech, which is another, one thing I want to just point out and just take a real quick break from regular teaching is that in the case when you finish this particular program, you might say, like, I don't want to be a software engineer, I don't want to write code, and that's totally fine. There is a lot of money to be made within tech that's not purely based on writing code. You've done the hardest part, which is learning how to code, and you can do anything from QA to technical product management. You can sell software. There's one person that I knew who worked at Oracle, and I think when they sold software, it was like $350 a year of like just like pure commissions that were coming in from his sales job. That's a lot of money. $350,000 is a lot of money. So I'm just saying that in the case that you don't want to be a software engineer, that's totally okay. And there's a lot of money to be made here anyway. Working at, I forgot, but all these people are working in the industry. So I'm just going to create a bunch of students, and I'm going to save them all, and then we'll take a quick break. So I ran through the script. All of this came directly from the curriculum. So if I clear out the screen, no, clear doesn't work over here. Let's do cohorts.objects.all. Cohort.objects.all. You'll see that I created two cohorts. That's this Bravo on line 3 and Charlie on line 6. And I have these two underneath the hood. If I do student.objects.all, what you'll notice here is I've got a query set. I've got 6 students inside of there, but you'll also notice like I don't understand anything that's going on inside of here. Like, why is this happening the way that it is? And that comes back to this line number 8 over here. This str is the string representation of how it's going to look when you enter it inside of this console here. You'll notice I said ID is equal to 1, cohort name is equal to the cohort name, start date is equal to start date. So you know exactly like all the fields and everything that's available within here. I created a custom string method, but the built-in one just looks like this: string object 1, string object 2, string object 3. Student object 1, 2, and 3. And that's okay, but it's not terribly descriptive. And you always have to like look inside to understand what their first name is and what their last name is and what cohort they belong to. So I'm just going to update this real quick and bring this back. Grab this.
That's not actually a string, right? It's still the object.
It's still the object. I don't know if I can reload like this. I don't know. Move to objects at all. Oh, let me exit. Go back to the shell. I'm going to just copy this first line here, and then student.objects.all. And now I have that query set that looks a little bit different. I've got the first name and last name, first name and last name. You'll notice that that looks very different from this line right up here. It's a little bit easier to deal with. All right, let's take an 11-minute break. We'll be back at 9:10, and then we'll create our URLs. We'll go inside of our views and create templates as well. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Alrighty, we are back from the break. Sorry if this is weird in the recording, because I just paused the recording and restarted it here. All right, so just to kind of review where we were, we just finished our models. We migrated them over to the database. We've got data inside of our database at this particular point. And now we're going to register our actual URLs. So similar to when we created our app called Cohorts and Students, it's part of a project in something called Old Cohorts. So we registered it inside of settings.py, inside of the project level. We registered these URLs right over here. This app over here. But similarly, we also need to register the URLs that are associated with cohorts and students within the project Old Cohorts. What's going to happen is I'm going to jump over to urls.py. I'm inside the Old Cohorts application. Let me just get rid of all this for right now. I'm going to bring in an extra library called include. And then I'm going to add in another path called cohorts. I'm going to send them to cohorts and students.urls. So what did I do? I added 2 things. These 2 lines came for free, and I added the include library, which I used on line 6. So whenever anybody makes a request to localhost 8000 or whatever my URL is, /admin, the admin.site.urls library will take care of all of that. Whenever anybody makes a request to my site /cohort/anything, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass them off to the cohort and students folder, specifically the URLs file. So let's go there. I'm going to close this one out. Inside of cohorts and students, there is no URLs file, so I'm going to just create that one by hitting urls.py. And yes, I know I'm using the GUI, and I tell people not to do that, but this is real life. And URL, not week 1 people anymore. So inside this file, what I'm going to do, first line, I'm going to do from Django.urls import path. This is a library that I'm going to be using. And I'm also going to be creating, I'm also going to be importing the views. So from my current directory, import the views file. And I'm just going to create my URLs probably one at a time, just so that we're not overwhelmed with everything. So there's a couple patterns that I want to have. And the first one's going to be, copying from the, just copying. All right, so I've created a urls.py file within the cohort and students application. On the first line here, inside of the Django library, there's a URLs sub-library. Within there, there's a sub-library called path. And then I'm on line 2, I'm importing the views file from the current directory. So this dot means current directory. So from the current directory that I'm in right now, which is URLs, bring in the views file, and I'm going to be referencing that on line 5. I'm registering a bunch of URL patterns, which means that this is a kind of like a phone book of all the URLs that are available to me right now. So the path is /cohort/nothing goes to the views file, specifically the cohort list method. And then if I ever want to reference it, I give it a name called cohort list. So I'm going to grab views.py. I'm going to close this one out. I'm going to split this to the right for right now. If it becomes too small, please let me know. But I figured it'd be useful to have 2 things side by side. So I've got my views file right over here. And this first one, let me open up the other URLs one. Again, just to reference it, we have urls.py inside the old cohorts application project. I'm registering it so that whenever anybody makes a request to /cohorts/anything, it passes it off to this second file over here, the second tab, urls.py within the application. So anytime anybody makes a request to /cohorts/nothing, take me to the cohort list method within the views.py file. So inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I don't know, probably just create a method to grab all the URLs and just, grab all of the cohorts from the database and just display it. So with that, I need to bring in the cohort from models.py. So similar like what we saw on line 2 on the URLs file, we're going to do from.models import cohort. From the current directory, there's a file called models, and from inside of there, I'm going to grab the cohort class and pull it into this particular file. And then line number 1, I'm just going to do def cohort list. It's going to take in a request. I'm going to grab all of the cohorts from the database. So I'm going to say cohorts equals cohort.objects.all. And then I'm going to render out this thing to the screen. So I'm going to grab this from the curriculum and just copy and paste. Right, so let's see what we've got here. So somebody makes a request to /cohorts. I'm going to take you to the views file, specifically the cohort list. Inside of there, I'm going to grab all the objects from the database. Remember, this is the M of MTB, model template view. So I've got this model, capital C cohort. It talks to the database. It gets all the records from the database and saves it inside this variable called cohorts. Then I'm going to pass it off to the cohorts folder, specifically the cohorts list HTML template. And then that's going to need some data, which is cohorts equal to the cohorts that I found on line 5. I'm missing something. I have render. I need to bring in request is good. It's probably fine. Am I missing anything? No, I think we're good. All right. So next thing, inside of here, I need to create a templates folder. Inside of there, I need to create a cohorts folder. Inside of there, I need to create a cohorts list.html file. And now let me grab this and paste this in. So again, we're just going to go one more time through the entire thing. Somebody makes a request to /cohorts/nothing. So I want to look for all of the cohorts. It takes me to the views file. The views file has a cohort list method. The method does a whole bunch of stuff and then renders out a HTML template. So I'm grabbing all the cohorts from the database using this capital M model. Specifically, I'm talking about the cohort. And then I'm creating a templates folder with a cohorts subfolder. And the file that we're going to be referencing is cohortslist.html. Inside of there, this is the HTML file that we're talking about. It's just going to have an H1 at the very top that says all cohorts. We're going to iterate over the cohorts that we pass in, which is right over here. We're going to iterate over each one, and we're going to create a URL for cohort detail. We're going to display their name. We're going to end the for loop, and then we're going to have a URL for the new cohort. Let's see if this runs, which it won't. So I'm going to run Python manage.py. We can still see we're within our what do we call it? Virtual environment. I'm going to run server. This runs. It runs up, and then it just blows up and says it doesn't have any patterns inside of it. Let's just see if this works. If I get rid of all this, I'm just going to cut it for right now. I'll paste it again later. Let's see. Localhost 8000, and it's still broken. Let's restart it. Oh man. Okay, let's see. The URL.
In your URLs file, you got URLs patterns instead of URL pattern right there. There you go.
Cool. All right. Thanks. And it says there's a development server running at 8,000. And I go over here, I refresh the page, and what? It's broken. It doesn't show me anything. I expected to see this H1 all cohorts. Can someone tell me what's wrong and how I can troubleshoot this?
You're essentially at your index right now, which
I'm at yeah, that's exactly it. I'm at my index right now, which means that I'm actually not at /cohorts or /admin. Remember, the entry point is URLs at the application level. So I need to go over to /cohorts, and then there's that all cohorts. So at least I know that it's hooked up to the point where I can actually hit all cohorts. If I put this back in and I refresh this page, everything blows up because there's a whole bunch of stuff missing. Specifically, I don't have I don't even have the read for an individual cohort set up. I don't have the update. I don't have the new. I don't have the create. I don't have anything yet. So with that, what we're going to do is we're just going to start creating more URL patterns. And due to time, because I have 40 minutes, I'm going to start copying and pasting more aggressively. But don't worry, I will go over everything in great detail. So these are all the routes that we talk about when we talk about restful routing patterns. Whenever anybody makes a request to /cohorts/nothing, I get a whole list of every single cohort. And then if I wanted to view the form to create a new cohort, it goes to /cohort/new. If I'm looking for a particular cohort with a particular cohort ID, like /cohort/1, this is the path that takes care of it. So /cohort/some sort of integer saved as cohort ID, pass you off to the views file, specifically the cohort detail. If I want to reference it as a named variable, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, it's going to be referenced as cohort detail. Same thing's down for edit and delete. Now, I think I updated the curriculum in the past. So before it used to say PK, which is what you'll see in some online tutorials. That's fine if you're only talking about one resource, because PK in this particular case talks about primary key. Since we're talking about two resources now, we have cohorts and we have students, I want it to be a little bit more descriptive of what I'm putting inside the URL. So if I say PK, is it referencing to the cohort or is it referencing to the student? By having it named this way with cohort ID, there's no question about what's actually being talked about inside the URL. So I've got all of my routes over here, and now I'm just going to add each one of all of my views as well. Let me grab all of this right now, and we will go over each one in great detail. All right, magic, copy and paste. All of a sudden, it just works. Let's take a look at what we've done. So we've got a whole bunch of render and redirects and stuff like that. Let's just see if this works for right now. We'll run each line Oh man, no form. Get rid of that for right now. Let me get rid of this for right now. Actually, I can't. All right, what I'm going to do, we're just going to go over each line by line. All right, so whenever anybody makes a request, it's a /cohort/nothing. I'm taking you to the cohort list. This is what we had before. We grab all the cohorts from the database. We render out the cohorts list HTML file, and we pass in these particular variables. That's this templates/cohorts/cohort list over here. If I want to view each individual one, /cohorts/ID, I'm going to take you to the views file again, specifically the cohort detail on line number 12. It takes in a cohort ID inside as an argument, and I'm going to get the cohort based off of the number. Get cohort is a method that I wrote at the very top. It takes in a cohort ID, and it just returns cohort.objects.get, and then you pass in that particular ID to get that one cohort from the database. And at this point on line 13, you have the actual cohort. Then you pass them off to cohort detail, the HTML, which is not created yet, so let's do that. So cohort detail. Let's see to my wife who just sneezed. And let's grab that. Now we've got some HTML. So again, on line 13, I grabbed the cohort from the database using this model, this cohort model here, and then I'm passing off that cohort as a payload to cohort detail because I know that I'm going to be interpolating or doing something with the data from the database. So I'm going to be interpolating, that's this double curly brace right over here. It's going to be cohort.cohort name, start date, and end date. So it just displays a bunch of information. And what you'll notice underneath here is that there is an href to create a URL. And usually when I create hrefs, it should be something like href equals, I don't know, like /cohort/cohort ID. Like usually it's supposed to be hard-coded, but what we've got here on line number 8 is we've got a URL helper. What's happening here is this is saying, hey, when I have the opening curly brace and the %sign, hey, I'm asking Python, for Django in this case, to create a URL called edit cohort. This edit cohort jumps back over to the urls.py file, specifically line number 8. It says, whenever you see the name edit cohort, I'm specifically talking about this particular URL. Can anybody tell me why it's more sustainable to do something like line number 7 versus hard coding URLs like I had before, href equals /cohort/cohort ID? Joel, tell me why this is more sustainable on line 8 versus line 7.
I'm honestly not sure. I always started doing like line 8 because I liked that it was. I like the idea that I had that like edit cohort was a method, and the one after that was a variable you pass it.
Right.
That just made it easier for me.
It made it easier for you. Okay, so that is one thing. You don't have to like write as much code. Well, arguably you might have to write more code. But the main reason why we want to do line 8 versus line 7, this is what I call hard coding. Whenever you hard code something, you're definitely making your code more brittle. What that means is, if I hard code this URL here, and I do that multiple times throughout my entire app, I have to remember every single time that I ever hard coded something and then update it in every single place. By having this URL helper for edit cohort, this is a helper so that in the case I ever decide to change the URL for edit cohort, I change it in one place right here versus all the different places that I hard code within my app. So I've got my cohort name, I've got my start date, I've got my end date, I've got this edit cohort right over here. And this is just a URL. It's saying, look inside the URLs file for the edit cohort named route. So let me split right real quick. Go inside the URLs file, look for the edit cohort, and it requires an argument called cohort ID, and that's what I'm passing in. The cohort ID to create this URL is equal to this current cohort that you passed in, its ID, and then it just says edit ID. Same thing here. I've got my URL for delete cohort, and the one that I'm going to delete is that cohort ID on line number 9. I'm passing that in. Since the URL is in this case, cool. I didn't look too closely at that one. Cool. So let's see where we're at. So we've just went over cohort detail, and now we're going to talk about new cohort. So again, this is that line number 6 /cohorts/new. So whenever anybody makes a request to that, I'm passing you off to the views file, specifically the new cohort method. New cohort method is right over here. If the request that comes through is a post, I'm going to create a form for you, check if it's valid, and then save it into the database. And then, see if the form is good, and then save it into the database, and then redirect you to that particular cohort detail. Remember that redirect is cohort detail, refers to cohort detail line 7 in urls.py. Now, there's a lot of magic that's happening here with this form, and this is here on line number 3. Let's create that form real quick. So within this same directory, which is within the same directory as views.py, there is going to be a file called forms that you have to create, .py. And within there, there should be a cohort form. With that, let me grab this. I'll put this in there. Comment that out right now. So I've got this cohort form, which inherits from forms model form, and then a class called meta. Essentially what's happening here is that this Django is what's called an opinionated framework, meaning that a bunch of people sat in a room and said, what are the things that we hate doing over and over, and how can we automate that? So for a lot of people, like, because CRUD is so popular and you have to do it all the time, creating the form is a bunch of HTML stuff that you have to create over and over again. It probably looks something a little like this. You have a /form, and another form here, and then you have a method equals post, and then I think it's like URL, like you have to send this to /cohorts, and then you have to keep building more and more stuff, and then you have to build out the actual form itself here, and then there's going to be a submit button. So you're creating a bunch of stuff over and over again. I heard a question and I talked over you. Someone asked something?
No, it wasn't a question. What I heard was somebody said action instead of URL. So in other words, the action method is what,
yeah.
Or not the method, but the action tells it where to go once somebody clicks submit.
Yeah. But you kind of get, even that, you kind of get the point. You corrected me. You're probably right on this action stuff. I haven't had to think about creating forms for so long because it's all the same thing over and over again. And imagine if you had to type out an entire HTML form every single time you wanted to type out a form. It takes a long time. It's cumbersome to maintain. And the idea that the Django folks thought of when they were creating this particular framework was, let's create a form class, a model form class, that if you pass me the fields that you're looking for that are associated with this particular model, so through these 2 lines alone, I'm able to generate an HTML form that writes to the cohort model with these particular fields that we're looking for. And that's the idea of why they created the forms to be this particular way. And that's what we've got over here in this views.py file, tab number 3. So again, if we have a request, if the request that's coming through is a post, I'm going to create an instance of the form, the cohort form that we just created in tab number 4. If it's a valid form, we're going to save that form, save the cohort, and then hopefully if that works, we're going to redirect you to the actual cohort itself. Same thing happens over here on the edit. Same thing here happens on the edit, and then the delete. If the request that comes through is a post, grab the cohort from the database, delete it, and then redirect to the actual cohort list. This should more or less be reviewed for everyone. Seeing as I have 30 minutes, I'm just going to start copying these things. Sorry. Create one last one. Let's see if this works. All right, let me refresh the page. All right, so here we are. We're at /cohorts. We can see we've got H1 for all cohorts. We have Bravo and Charlie, and then also create a new cohort. What is the purpose of form.save commit equals false? Good question. This is this line over here. Let me review that once we get there. So we made a request to this main page. Takes me to the cohort list method inside of views.py. I'm going to change over to tab number 3. Cohort list grabs everything from the database, passes it as a payload right over here on line 10, specifically to the cohorts list.html file. Let me open that one up. Cohorts list.html. I've got that all cohorts. It iterates over all the cohorts using this curly brace %sign. And then I'm creating a div and a list item in the unordered list HTML elements over here. Each one of these that's going to get displayed is cohort.cohort name. Cohort.cohort name. So we got Bravo and we have Charlie. And we created a URL using this URL helper. Again, anytime that you see curly brace and %sign, you know that you're running some sort of Pythonic command. I've got a URL specifically called cohort detail with this information inside of it. Okay? Let me split down so it's a little easier to read. I'm inside my URLs file. There is a cohort detail on line number 7, and I'm passing in the number that it requires inside of the path. If I hover over this, you'll notice that it takes on the bottom left-hand side of my screen /cohorts /1 /cohorts /2. And then I have this create a new cohort. And that's found here on line number 11 on the bottom half of my screen. And there's an href for URL, new cohort. It doesn't require any sort of, you don't need to pass anything in like a cohort ID, it's just /cohort /new. And the words that show up on the screen are create a new cohort. So let's take a look at that first. Oh, okay, so this blew up. Let's take a look, let's read this. Template does not exist at /cohorts /new. So that tells me that when I went to /cohorts /new, line number 6 /new takes me to this views cohort. You can actually right click and go to definitions, and then it'll take you there. That's one good part about VS Code. All right, let's take a look here. So it says /cohort new. I'm not making a post request because I'm making a get request because I'm trying to actually just get to that particular URL. And so I'm creating a new form. That's good. And then it takes me to the cohorts template. Inside of there should be, this looks like, if you can see it, it looks like the cohort form is outside of the cohorts directory. So I'm just going to drag it in there. And hopefully this works now. Let me refresh the page. And there's that cohort. Now, I'm going to fill this one out. And notice that I didn't actually write this form at all. It just says type of request to the cohort. It's just going to be a new cohort. And then it just says form as P. Form comes from the views file on line 24. That's this thing over here. The type of request that comes through is also part of the payload that I put in. Let me put this on the bottom so it's easier to see both of them. Actually, let me put this one on top. I'll drag this down to the bottom. So I'm going to fill this one out. I'm just going to call this Lima. It started, I don't know, I'm just going to do 01, 10, 20, 03. When I hit save here, what's going to happen is it comes back as a post request, because whenever you submit a form, it's going to be a post. It's going to create an instance of the form. It's going to check whether or not the form is valid. Did you fill out all the things that you needed to do? And then on line 20, Page's question was, what is form.save commit equals false? Cohort is equal to the saved version of the form, but it's not yet committed into the database. You could also just do commit equals true and then be done with that. So the form has the ability to save, like basically it's like once I check the form and everything is valid, it has all the fields. Once I save it and I commit it to the database, the result of this thing here is going to be the actual cohort record inside of the database. And then I pass it off to cohort detail, which takes me again to URLs, cohort detail with that particular cohort ID right over here. Let's see if this works. Save. What you'll notice here is I've got /cohorts/3. There were only 2 in the beginning, so we know that this was successfully put into the database. If I go back just to /cohorts, there's that 3rd cohort that we've got there. And then finally, I'm going to update this one. Let me update it here. It's the same thought process. Whenever we get a get request, we get that particular cohort. We create the form from that cohort. That's why we see this is already pre-filled out. So I made a request to /cohort/SumID/edit. Takes me to the edit cohort definition. I'm going to get the cohort based off of what's passed in the URL. I'm making a get request, so I jump down over here, and I create that form that's already filled out. Once I fill it out again and I want to post it, it's the same thing that we see from up here. It's the exact same method. And then we just redirect them back to the cohort detail. So let me just call this Lima123. It's the same number as what we saw before, /cohort/3. So we have Lima123 over here, and then now I'm just going to delete it. But when I delete this, let's see where this comes from. So I'm on /cohorts/3, /cohorts/some number. So it takes me to the cohort detail. That takes me to the views file. Takes me to the cohort detail. I grab the cohort from the database, and I pass it off to the cohort detail HTML file here on tab number 6. There is a delete button at the very bottom that's going to be a form. Again, we've got that form. Imagine if you had to write all the forms all the time. The name is going to be delete cohort. We're going to post to this particular URL. The URL is the delete cohort URL. I don't know what that means, so I'm going to jump back over to the URLs. There's a delete cohort here on line number 9, which takes me to the views file, specifically the delete cohort method. Down at the very bottom, I've got this delete cohort method. If the method that comes through is a post, I'm going to grab the cohort from the database and then delete them and then redirect them to the list. So when I click on this, all of those actions happen in a fraction of a second. It finds it inside the database, takes me back to the cohort, and you'll notice that I only have Bravo and Charlie now. I don't have cohort number 3. In fact, if I type in cohort number 3 and hit enter, there is nothing inside of there because it's gone. So that's a little bit on the single resource of CRUD. And in the next 20 minutes, I will magically fly through all of the stuff for nested CRUD. But I want to take a quick pause and see if there are any questions. So the first one I'm seeing is, when is a form not valid? I'm guessing if you did not put in all the required fields. So if we take a look at models here, and we have cohort name, start date, and end date, and let's just say I threw in an extra one called cohort animal, and I made that, like, I copied this over here, and I said that it was required is true. I don't actually know if this is the right way of doing it. Let's say this is required, but then inside my form, I don't have it inside of here. You can't actually save it into the database because it's a required field that wasn't inside of your form.
So what's the other? So I noticed it had if the form is valid, but there was no else statement to do anything.
Yep, that's a good. I'm glad you picked up on that one. So what he's talking about specifically is either for the new or the edit, there is you create the form. You have to check whether or not it's valid. We don't have an else statement right now, but if you wanted to, like, say, like, you are missing XYZ, throw in something like the else statement, and I'm not sure exactly how to do it off the top of my head, but I'm guessing built into the form there's an automatic thing that says, like, maybe there's an errors attribute onto it, and then you can just display the errors to that particular user.
Yeah, it already does that automatically, so you don't really need the else, but it'll follow the logic through. So basically, we attempted to post the form, but now the form's not valid.
Yep.
And so it skips the second if, and then it'll skip the first else because that goes to the very first if, and then it goes straight to the return. So what it's going to do is go right back to the same page with the same form information for you to display it again. But now the form will be updated with the errors. So you don't necessarily need the else in there.
Hold on, let me delete this stuff. Restart the server. Let's see if it works. That's a good point. /new and save. Oh, this is just HTML.
You're going to have to go in the inspector tool and modify the element and remove the required from it so that you can submit it with
I actually don't
invalid.
have the required on here.
No, they're set by default. Model form sets required on the input field on the form on the HTML side. If you go into the inspector and look at the form, you'll see it.
I got you. I understand that. I'm just saying I have 18 minutes.
Okay. The JavaScript's blocking you though.
Yeah. I'm gonna ignore that for right now. You close all of these out. So I've got a clean slate. All right. So let's. So we just did one full resource. This is everything related to the cohort, and now we're going to, as quickly as possible, do in all the fields for the nested version. Now, this nested version is actually pretty simple. It's exactly the same thing, except that you have to find one additional resource prior to getting started. So what you'll notice here is I have a whole bunch of new stuff. So, but it follows a very similar pattern. Anytime anybody makes a request to /cohorts/SumID/SomeStudent, it's going to take me to the views file, specifically the student list, and I've got all these same names over here. So I'm just going to go one by one. If we go over a little bit, that's probably okay. I have to check back meetings. Views student list. If I right-click and go to definition, it doesn't exist because I need to actually find it first. So jumping over to views.py, at the very bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a method called student list. I believe that's what it's called, students list. Sorry. Why am I trying to do this when I can split the screen? All right, so I can go to student list. It's going to take in a request. It looks like it's also going to take in a cohort ID. First things first, I want to make sure that I get I have to actually get my cohort. So cohort equals get cohort with cohort ID. And then at this point, this is where it becomes a little bit different. I'm going to actually get all the students. By doing students equals cohort students.all. And you might be wondering, like, where does this magic come from? Like, how can I just go from one object to another, and how can I just jump around? If you remember inside of our models file, we had a related name called students on line number 13 here. So whenever we go from cohort and we want to get a list of all the associated students, because a student belongs to a cohort, all we got to do is just do cohort dot this related name. If I wanted to, I can name it whatever I want. Student.poop.all, I can just change this. I don't know if I have to rerun a migration, but you get the idea. I could change that if I wanted to. I'm just going to leave this as is for right now. So back over here, I got my cohort, I got all my students, and at this point, I'm ready to pass it off to another view. The view is going to be the template. The template folder is going to have a folder called students. Inside of there, it's going to have a students list.html. So it's, again, this is the same thing as before, except with one additional element, which is I have to also find the student in addition to the cohort itself. So under templates, I'm going to create a new folder called students. Inside of there, I'm going to create a file called studentslist.html. And inside of there, I am going to have this all students for cohort.cohort name, which I found over here. So first things first, I'm finding the cohort, I'm passing that into the payload on line number 47, and I'm referencing it on line 1 inside the HTML file. I iterate over each one of the students, and then I'm going to be creating, let me get rid of this for right now. I'm just going to do student.firstname, student.lastname, just to get something out on the screen. I'm going to get rid of this as well, just so we can see something. Also at the bottom of the cohort detail, file, cohort detail being /cohorts/some number. I'm going to add in this extra thing that's going to say the student list. So let's see if this works. I hope it does. Let's go to cohort number 1, and we got this over here. Now, if I hover over it, it says /cohorts/1/students. How does it do that? Again, we're creating URLs that are named. Inside of the URLs file, there's a student list method, student list name on line number 11. It requires a cohort ID, which I'm passing in right after I've referenced student list on line 18 of the HTML file. That's how it generates this particular URL. If I click on it, it takes me to all students for Bravo, and you can see that I am at /cohort/1/students. I've got all of those associated students that I created very early on in the class today. Oof, okay, let me recopy this. All right, now we have to continue on. Let's say if I wanted to let me get rid of this. What if I wanted to view a student's details? If I go back here and I refresh the page, it blows up. It says like student detail not found, because if you take a look, it says I'm looking for a URL called student detail inside the URLs file. Student detail is right there, but it's commented out. So let me uncomment that. And now, whenever anybody makes a request to /student detail, which is /cohort/some number /student/some number, I'm going to send them to the views file, specifically the student detail method that I haven't created yet. So def student detail. Now this takes in two things. It takes in a cohort ID, that's the first thing that comes in. But it also finds a student ID. First things first, we always want to make sure that we find the cohort. But now we also need to find the individual student. So where I'm defining this at the very top, I'm also going to create a method called getStudent. So it should be something as simple as student equals getStudent, and then pass in the student ID. So let's find where we define getCohort and basically add in the same method for getStudent. So there's a getCohort at the very top. Maybe I'll do something called getStudent. Takes in a student ID, and I need to create the query. Return student.objects.get ID equals student ID. Now student's going to blow up because I didn't actually import it yet, but on line 2, it's as easy as just adding a comma and adding in student. What I'm doing here is I'm going to the models file here on the left side, grabbing the cohort model and bringing it into this particular class. Same thing, I'm grabbing the student right afterwards and importing it to the class so I can use it on line number 9. So whenever I make a request to /cohorts/some ID /student/some ID, I'm going to come here to the student detail. I'm going to grab the student, I'm going to grab the cohort, and then same thing as before, once I grab that information, I'm going to render it out on a screen. So /student/student detail, which doesn't exist yet. We've got our students folder under our templates. We have a students list, which we see on line number 50, but we also need one more called student detail.html. Student detail, I can grab right over here inside the curriculum, and let us get rid of this for right now. Let's just see if we can get there. So I'm passing in student.first name, last name, member of one particular cohort. Come back over. I've got all of my list of students. I'm actually creating the numbers themselves. We look at the bottom left, /cohort/1/student/1/number 3/number 4. So if I click on Scott, who's number 2, it takes me to this page, which is the student detail for a particular student. Scott P, member of Bravo, that's what we see here. Scott Scott, and then P is the last name here, member of whatever. So we're able to read all of the students. We're able to read the individual student. Now we're going to need to, now we need to be able to actually add a student. So same thing as before, we create a URL called new student. Luckily, it's already over here. So let me just uncomment that. So somebody makes a request to /cohort/1/student/new, rather than going over here to a particular number, it goes to /new. It takes me to the views file, specifically the new student method. And what you'll notice about this, again, it's all the exact same thing. Yeah, it's all the exact same thing with just an extra resource attached. So let me grab this from the curriculum because I don't feel confident with myself and able to actually do this correctly. Do this. All right. So we've got def new student. There's that new student method on line 12 over here. It takes in a cohort ID from the URL. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run more or less the same thing. We're going to create a student form. We're going to check if it's valid. If it is, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to save it into the database and then redirect you to that particular student. There's something missing here. I actually realized there's a bug. Student, cohort. Sorry. So first things first, I'm going to grab the cohort based off of the URL because I know that's the cohort that I want to write for. I'm going to fill out the form. The form is just going to have their first name and their last name. And then I'm going to save that into the database. I'm going to create the form itself. I'm going to update their cohort to be the cohort that I found inside the URL and then save them into the database at that point. Otherwise, they're not actually associated with the cohort. So the thing that's missing right now is the student form on line number 60. If I scroll all the way up, you saw that there was a form for cohort form. So that means that within the same directory, there's a forms file I'm going to open up. Oops. I'll drag it over here to the left side. And inside of there, there's a cohort form that has all of this here. I'm going to more or less repeat the same process. Copy this, throw it down at the bottom, and anytime I see the word cohort, I'm going to change it to student. And the thing I want to look for is I want to have the first name, and I want to have the last name. That's it. So if we jump back into our models, that's all we really needed. We needed a first name, we needed a last name, and we also need to write the cohort as well. But the cohort we're writing is down right here on line number 63. Hopefully this works. I'm not really sure. But, and for right now, we also need to create the student form itself. So let's jump over here. We're at the students template folder. We do student form.html. From there, I'm just going to grab this from the curriculum. It looks very similar to the form for the cohort. I'm going to say that this is a new cohort. Just display the form and then button to save. Let's see if this works. Let's go to /cohort/1, students in this cohort, and we're going to add a new student. If I hover over this, you'll see that it goes to /cohort/1/student/new, and just to see the HTML template for this, I'm going to, let me just grab this here. I'm trying to find the URL for /cohorts/some-number/students. There's that student list. There it is. That's the one that matches up. So we're talking about line 11 here. It takes me to the student list method, which takes me to the student list HTML file. There's that URL that we just created a little bit earlier. This is a helper. So we look inside the URLs file for the new student. And there's that new student here on line number 12. When I click on this, oh man, student form is not defined. This is annoying. But let's go back. So it says student form is not defined. So
That should be student underscore form when you called it, most likely on one of your HTMLs.
no, I just forgot to put it here. So I referenced student form at the bottom, right here on line 60, but I didn't import it at the very top. That's all that was missing. If I go back here and I refresh, there's that thing right over here. It says new cohort. Let me change that to, where did it go? Student form. Oh, another typo in the curriculum. New student. Refresh the page, new student. All right, so I'm going to add, who was also in that class? Raul Vasquez. When I hit save over here, let's walk through what actually happens next. So I go to, once I hit the save, it becomes a post request. I'm going to fill out the actual form itself, check if it's valid. If it is, then I'm going to save it, save the result of it as the instance of student. I'm going to update the student's cohort to match the cohort that we were just talking about, and then save them into the database. And then if all goes well, I'll redirect it to the student detail URL, which is found right over here, passing in two things, the cohort ID and the student ID. And notice I'm referencing the cohort as student.cohort.id because I can go up from the student to the cohort to the ID that's built into this particular model here. Let's see if this works. Save. Students, number 7. Raul Vasquez, member of Bravo. Let's jump back into cohort /1 to see if Raul shows up at the very bottom. And there's Raul, student number 7. We've got 2 actions left and 60 seconds to do it in. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to be able to edit a particular student. So when I look at the student detail, there's this giant block of code here. So I want to be able to edit the student. Let's say the student wants to change their name or whatever, or they took on a new name of some sort. I want the ability to be able to edit them. So I have this URL called edit student, which is found here on line 14. I'm going to uncomment it. You'll notice that I'm passing in the cohort ID that it's required over here. And then it takes me to specifically the views file, the edit student function. So inside of my views file, I'm going to create a new method. It'll be called edit student, which I'm going to copy and paste. That looks very, very similar. Looks very, very similar to what we had before. We're going to grab the cohort. We're going to grab the student. And then we're going to create a student form with that actual student stuff already filled out. So this is the idea, like when you go to a website and you have stuff that's already filled out for you, this is what they're doing. They're finding the information that's already in the database, and then they implement it inside of the HTML. And the way that Django implements it is this right over here, this instance equals student. We find the student, we create a form with that information that's already there. And the same thing as before, we just kind of find the student, we just make sure that their student, their cohort, cohort, we save it, and then we redirect them again. Let's see if this works. All right, let's say I go to Raul. Oh man, delete student not found, delete student is not a, all right, let's take a look. So it's blowing up here at student detail.html line number 10. Let's jump over to line number 10 of student detail. And it looks like I'm referencing something I haven't actually implemented yet. You take a look here on line 15. Let's go back, refresh this page. I'm going to edit this particular student. I'm going to edit the student now. I'm going to name him Raul123. Hopefully all goes well. And you can see that we kept the number 7 same as before, so we did alter the database record, and now his name is Raul123 Vasquez. I'm going to edit the student, but let's say Raul decides to actually drop out. I'm going to put this one back in there. We've got this delete cohort. Oh man, I just realized that's this. And it's going to be a post. It's going to go to the delete student URL, which is found over here. And we're passing in two things, this particular cohort ID and this particular student's ID. And we have both from the previous method call that was put in place here. So now we've added this HTML, we've added the URL, and now we're going to go inside the views file, specifically the delete student method. So let's jump down. That's delete student. And I'm just going to copy this again from the curriculum. And we're going to go over each line. All right, so the delete student takes a cohort and it takes a student. If the request that comes through is a post request, which it is, because if I jump over to student detail, there's that method equals post right here. I'm going to grab the student from the database using the student ID that was passed in from the URL. I'm going to delete them, and I'm going to redirect to the student list of that particular cohort. Again, student list, there's that named route right there, and it needs the cohort list in order to function. Let's go back.
You really don't need the student ID to do the delete. The cohort is for where you route afterwards, right?
Correct. Yeah. So just to repeat your question, I need the student ID so I can find the student and delete them from the database, and then I need the cohort ID. So it's like, because when you delete something, you automatically usually get redirected somewhere afterwards. And that's what's going to happen here. I'm going to refresh this page. There's that delete student button. When I click on this, it's going to go to the delete student method. The delete student URL, which is found right over here on line 15. It's going to be a post request. Passes me off here. It recognizes it as a post request. It's going to get the student, delete them, and then redirect me to student list, which is going to be /cohort1/students. So let's see if this works. Delete, and it takes me to /cohort1/students. If I try to go back to Raul, number 7, you'll notice that that person doesn't exist anymore within the database. So what does this mean for you all today? I realized I went a little bit fast towards the end and went really, really slow at the beginning. Sorry about that. My recommendation is what we'll do now is we'll take a break until 10:15 after I'm done talking. I'd recommend, it's today pairing day, it's Wednesday, so no pairing today. I'd recommend going through all of this, and I'm going to post this on YouTube pretty shortly. And all of the things that I wrote, all the things that I said today are all found within this particular bit of curriculum. There's a few bugs that I will fix right after this. And then afterwards, make sure that you're running through everything yourself to make sure, just make sure you're running through everything. There are 3 challenges that will remain the same. It's the same thing as what we have today. We have cars and brands, we have beer reviews, and meetup. Are there any questions that I can answer for anybody?
This is kind of like a cosmetic thing, but like when I've been doing them so far, like to me, it helps to like say, like it's kind of confusing to have the app name the same as the database name as the whatever. So I'll put a little prepend in there. So like, this is the app, this is the project. This is,
and that is totally fine. Yeah, that's cool.
Except that then it kind of, what I realized today is that kind of, because it's using those names in the URLs, it kind of ends up looking a little bit ugly.
It does.
Yeah,
but it's
actually I'll just get comfortable with it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me teach you all. There's a few bugs that I will fix in just a little bit, but yeah, it's good seeing you all, and I will see you all next week.